it is time for the new AMD 800 chipsets and their accompanying motherboards to drop, which they already have. In front of me, this is the ASUS ROG Strix X870E-E gaming Wi-Fi. It may look like a direct upgrade over the previous X670, but there's actually more to it than that. There shouldn't be much of a performance difference between X6 and X8, but it's more of an updated BIOS, a GISA, and the mandatory inclusion of USB 4 on X870 boards. While it is optional to have USB 4 on X670, board manufacturers must include USB 4 on X870 boards. And yes, we have two of them on this X870E-E. And besides that, there's also a ton of other USB ports on this board. Let's count them. At the front, one standard Type-C, one USB 3 20G, one USB 3 5GB, and 3 USB 2.0 ports. For the back, besides the USB 4.0, there is one USB-C 10G, one USB 20G, and 8 Type-A ports. Not counting the actual number of usable USB ports, there's like 18 ports on this board. Holy crap! I guess with all these ports, I can see the potential use for this. Like for myself, who uses a lot of SD cards and SD card readers at one given time, there is no longer a need for an external USB hub. And since we are on the topic of USB ports, let's also take a look on what other ports we have on the back I/O. For a start, there is a HDMI port and there's no DP port because you have your USB 4.0 ports. For someone like I who tests hardware pretty often and may not have access to GPUs all the time, I tend to use the onboard graphics from the AMD CPUs together with a DP port. So do take this into consideration if you use the DP port as much as I do. And next, we have the standard clear CMOS and BIOS flashback buttons. For connectivity, no more 2.5G but 5G LAN ports. This board also supports Wi-Fi 7, and ASUS has included their very easy to plug and remove Wi-Fi 7 antennas that we have first seen on the Z790 boards. Below the Wi-Fi 7, you also have the standard audio ports. In terms of design, there is a big change over the previous X6 board. It is still completely black, but there is more artwork. You can see a much thicker I/O area with a much thicker VR heatsinks. And there's also quite a radical addition in this M.2 area, which I will talk about in a later part of the video. So don't miss that. As an X870 board, this board supports AMD Ryzen 9000, 8000 and 7000 CPUs, up to 192 gigs of DDR5 RAM, and it has a host of M.2 slots and PCIe slots. Okay, before we go on to the magical part of this board, I'd just like to point out to you some ports and headers that you may want to know. First thing, of course, you have your standard 8-pin CPU power in, 4 headers for your CPU fans as well as a standard fan, CPU fan optional, a pump header as well as one system fan header, a Q code LED followed by the diagnostic LEDs, an RGB header, and you also have 2 more ARGB over here at the bottom. This is the start button, pretty handy to have who like to test hardware without need for a front start button. This is a flex key which I think can be used as a reset button, 24-pin connector to power on your motherboard, 4 SATA ports, a CPU over voltage and a temperature sensor if you are into that, the front panel connectors, a very nice convenient location for the CMOS battery. It is no longer blocked by any PCIe slot or M.2 slot. Very good. 2 more fan headers over here, 1 more fan header over here, 1 last sister fan header, and this is the front audio header. So if you're wondering, this board gives you 3 ARGB headers and 5 system fan headers. Okay, so I'm going to put in some components as well as show you some of the cool M.2 configurations that you have on this board. I'm going to first start off with the Ryzen 9600X. You can see that this is the similar socket to the X670 boards. Yep, just open it up. New boards is a bit hard to remove. Okay, the pin outs are similar. Okay, close it up. Just going to pop it out, socket cover, and put it in. Okay, we are done with the CPU. Okay, for RAM, I have a very interesting one. This is from a company called KingBank. 32 gigs of DDR5 RAM, 6800 MHz at C34. Pretty good latency for higher clock speeds. And it looks pretty good also. Shout out to KingBank for passing me this pair of RAM to play with. So I'm going to pop it at the usual 2nd and 4th slots. So you just have to remove these 2 tabs and press it in. Done. Okay, time for the fun part. So this board has 5 M.2 slots. This slot and this slot are held down by your typical screws. This one, I've mentioned the radical one, I'll show you later. So the one on top, there's 4 captive screws, so you have to remove all 4 of them. This is for your main Gen 5 SSD, that's why it's such a thicker heatsink. And it's a very cool design that tells you ROG Strix. Some other boards, there's a handle on it. The handle is pretty useful because you can carry the heatsink, but now it doesn't have a handle, but it looks pretty cool also. And you see the thermal pads are on it. Yep, this is a normal one. Before we go on to this one, I'm just going to do the second one as well as the third and fourth one because they have the same kind of locking mechanism. It still has this really interesting turn style thing, but it doesn't turn and lock your SSDs as the previous boards. As per usual, we're just going to put this inside here. And what you do is you can either, press it in and you'll shut it down, or you can just pull the tab back and release it and put it back in. It's also the same for the next two slots. Yep, this side goes here, put the tab back. Yep, and lock it in. Wow. Okay, how about the first M.2 slot? This is actually pretty good, pretty smart. Gonna align it up. You can put it back and lock it into place. Damn, what the hell, man. If you want to release it, just pull the lock back and you can pull out SSD. Let me show you from another angle. Pull the thing back and put it in. So if I see as now, I can put it to the max because you can put SSDs up to 221100. So you can put up to here to give it more space for the long SSDs. And if you're wondering, ASUS does give you spares for the tabs, these tabs as well as the lock here. You can remove this lock. I'm not going to show you how to do it because I think it's pretty complicated. I think you need to pull out these tabs and put it away from you. I'm not going to do that. But in case you ever lose any of these tabs or any of these lock, there are spares in the box and you can actually put it back. And very important, before installing SSD, remove the films from the thermal pads first. After installing it, remove the films from the thermal pad on the heatsink and reinstall the heatsinks back onto the SSDs. For the radical one, now this is one that I really like. Push. You can't be more dumb than that. Just push it down and the entire heatsink comes out like that. Oh my goodness. And this is a very thick heatsink. This is the place where you guide your heatsink back onto the socket. To put the SSD, it's pretty similar to the first one. So you just put this thing in. You can also force it in like that. Or if you want to be more gentle, there's a tab here that you can push it down and close it in. How you remove the heatsink is how you put back the heatsink. Glide this thing in. Sorry, the other way, sorry. Yeah, you should hear a click and you push it in. So yes, your SSD is installed. Goodness. This is 5.0x4, 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 and the ones on the bottom, these two are 4.0x4. So yes, you have 3 Gen 5 slots and 2 Gen 4 slots. Okay, so on first glance, there is nothing unusual about the PCIe slot configuration. The first one with the armor is 5.0x16. This one is 4.0x16. But talking about that, do you realize actually something is missing? Where is the Q release button usually found on ASUS motherboards? Well, this board does not have the Q release button. So you may be wondering, how do you actually remove your GPU? I'm going to show you how. Take this 4080 for example. You insert your GPU as per normal. Yep, how do you remove it? There is no other way, you just do this. You just pull it out from the board. If you don't believe, let me show you again. 1, 2, 3. That is crazy, man. I am not very sure about this new design from ASUS. I mean, they're pretty experimental because essentially you are just relying on this PCI slot and a small lock inside the slot to hold down a massive GPU such as this 4080 Super or something like a 4090. So I think I'm going to experiment to see how well this board, especially this PCI slot, holds up the weight of a 4080 Super. Either there's some pretty badass engineering that goes into the board. This is a very, I wouldn't say interesting, a very advanced way to make your stuff be as clean as possible. One more time, just for fun. Insert in, I want to change the GPU. I pull down the board, I pull down the GPU. Okay, let's take a look at what has changed in the BIOS. The interface remains the same, just that I don't like the new font ASUS has chosen to use for this BIOS. I prefer the previous one. This one just looks a bit too blocky. We are on BIOS 0505. Then we have the King Bank RAM, 2 of them, 32 gigs. So let's go on to the advanced mode. There is something new, it's called Expo on the Fly Plus. What does that actually mean? We already have Expo 1, 2, Expo Tweak. Expo on the Fly Plus maybe is more like the board choose how to give the best settings for the RAM at any given time, but I'm not sure. And also with this new update, you can push your Ryzen 9000 CPUs to run at 105 watts. If you want to do that, you can turn it on. Something has changed here. This guy now has a BIOS image rollback support, so if you need to roll back to your previous BIOS, you can just enable this. If you want to have different settings for your flex key, you can do so via here. The reset button, as I mentioned earlier, Aura on and off. You can turn on and off your RGB on the board. And there's a direct key which allows you one button press, boot directly into the BIOS. There is no longer a need to smash the delete button to get into the BIOS. Finally, we have BIOS Q dashboard. It took ASUS a long time before they get this to run. What essentially this does, it tells you what components you have plugged onto the motherboard. So we have a CPU plugged in, we have have a CPU fan for the CPU cooler, memory plugged in. So when you click on them, it tells you the different settings that you have. Like for the RAM, 32 gigs, you have not turned on Expo, what M.2 slots you are using, and what PCIe slots are you using for your graphics card. This is very good, especially when you have a lot of components and you want to know what goes into what. Refer to this checklist, the ASUS Q dashboard. This is not meant to be a full review, but just an overview and what I think about this new motherboard. From what I see, X870 boards are not going to be very affordable. If you don't need USB 4 and Wi-Fi 7, but still be able to want to use Ryzen 9000 CPUs, you can consider the X6 boards instead. But that said, it's a very nice board. The new design for the M.2 slots are especially very cool. I was planning to actually showcase the GPU upright onto the board, but I can't seem to find anything to prop it up, and this 4080 Super will definitely bring the board down. I'm not going to do it because I don't want to damage the board or something. If you are going to install this 4080 Super onto this board into a case, make sure to secure it well. Make sure to use the graphic card holder, graphic card stand to prop this guy up. This is a very heavy card. So if you like my overview, make sure to smash the like button. Let me know in the comments if you like this board and if you want to buy this board. So thank you. Bye.